to now turn to Melissa Whitaker, PhD researcher in the School of Geography, Politics and Sociology, talking about dating in COVID-19. So let's get rid of me in terms of spotlight. Let's have Sarah in terms of spotlight. Fantastic. So Sarah, thank you so much for being able to come along today, or rather to tune in today in your situation, wherever you are, and over to you.
Hi, hi everyone. Can you hear me? I can't see.
Yes, you can hear you. Definitely hear you. And, and it's very strange, isn't it? And I'm going to tell you for almost 10 minutes.
Thank you. So today I'm going to speak a bit about how the current pandemic is impacting my project. My research is broadly looking at dating apps and how users, specifically those who identify as heterosexual, are negotiating their intimate lives in the age of dating apps. And within this, I'm really interested in exploring whether and to what extent dating apps are impacting gender and sexual scripts. So I conducted about 12 interviews before the pandemic hit, and I'll briefly touch on one of the key findings that came from this, specifically around the issue of gender and risk. I'm mentioning them because I think these findings have been really useful for thinking about some of the questions and issues I think this pandemic raises around gender, sexuality and dating in relation to my project. I'm then going to discuss some of the ways dating app users and companies have been responding to dating in lockdown. And this will be informed by a brief social media analysis that I've been doing on things like Twitter, Instagram, but also dating app company blogs and things like that, which I found really useful for following how users have been responding to the current situation. And especially since it's only really recently that I've been able to continue doing interviews again. And then I'll conclude by drawing this all together, as well as some data gathered from recent interviews during the pandemic with current users of dating apps, to raise some issues that I think are important around gender, sexuality and risk in relation to my project. Okay, so something that came out of the interviews before the pandemic with the women I spoke to was that they had thorough risk minimization strategies that they felt were necessary to help ensure their safety when using dating apps and going on dates. So I have some quotes on the boards to demonstrate, but some common examples were making sure to meet in public places or telling friends and family where you were going or who you were going with. But it was also in the way that people used dating apps and chose who they were going to swipe yes to and who they were going to swipe no to. So female participants described how they would avoid profiles that had aggressive or creepy statements in the bio, or men who use creepy chat lines because they perceived these men to be creepy and risky. Something also that came about was the disparity in men and women's experiences of harassment on dating apps. So it seemed that women largely had to deal with this, whereas men less so. Some of the women I spoke to talked about situations where they had received direct verbal abuse for simply accidentally ignoring a message or rejecting a man's advances on the apps. Other women spoke of creepy chat lines that just made them feel uncomfortable. But even women who hadn't experienced it directly knew of others who had, or framed it as something that was lucky or uncommon in some way. So this was a risk that women spoke about and described managing. And one way I thought was interesting in how they managed this was purposely deleting the app for periods of time because of the frustration they felt and the hit that it took to their self-esteem by receiving all these creepy messages and harassment on dating apps. One woman referred to it as a Tinder detox, which I thought was great. So these are just preliminary findings, but I think they suggest that risk relating to personal safety are something women think about when using dating apps. And you know, women perceive themselves to be more at risk when it comes to dating and relationships, maybe even perhaps especially online, and they felt that they had to take responsibility for managing this. So which is very much in line with, you know, existing research into gender-based violence as well. So Now, that was before lockdown. I'd now like to discuss how users and dating app companies are responding during lockdown. So because lockdown measures mean people are hopefully keeping their interactions with matches online, and people are adapting to this by engaging in practices which might not necessarily be new. I'm sure this isn't the first time people have had to do something like a Zoom date or a Skype date, but it's definitely something that was less part of the dating app experience before. And something that seems to definitely be on the rise. There's also things like social distancing dates where people are meeting as apart in a park and things like that. And also dating app companies are introducing new features. So for example, Field has it now where users can join virtual hubs like remote trios or sex bunker, or fantasy bunker, sorry. Perhaps to accommodate for things like sex chat or video sex or sharing of sexual imagery, which seems to be increasing in popularity. And new dating apps have been created. One's called Quarantine Together, and it's an app that texts you asking if you've washed your hands today, and if you say yes, only then will it allow you to match with someone. So these are just some of the trends that I've picked up on, and they suggest that the pandemic might be having a drastic impact on users' dating app practice. The pandemic is being used as a chat line. It's part of people's conversations on the apps as well, and so it's potentially shaking up what users' understanding of what is normal when it comes to dating app practice. People are doing things that they never considered doing before the pandemic. So I'm interested in exploring what this means in terms of the futures that are being assembled around dating, gender and sexuality. What will this new normal be? What role will technology have in shaping this? And will this lead to gender and sexual norms being reproduced, subverted or transformed in new ways? And so bearing all this in mind, this led me to think about some of the risks that I think this pandemic raises around gender and risk, informed by my preliminary analysis, some of the trends I've been noticing, but also from interviews of current female dating app users that I've done during the pandemic. So I'm just going to stick to some key ones just for the sake of time. But one thing to consider is, will this pandemic impact the nature and level of risk minimization women feel they have to consider in practice? So think about the practicality of arranging a social distancing date where people not only have to think about their physical safety, but their health as well. I've conducted interviews with a few users during lockdown. Again, quotes will be on the screen. And this very much seems to be on women's minds. Some saying that they won't meet up because they don't want to take that risk. Others saying that they have done this or they will consider doing this, and that there are different risks that they are thinking about compared to before lockdown. Something else that has been documented during the pandemic, mainly by the media, but with some of the people that I've spoke to, is men harassing women to meet up during lockdown and to have sex or hook up or meet, and then gaslighting or shaming them if they don't or say no. Is this something new women are going to have to deal with and manage? I mean, again, the women I spoke to before, during lockdown were aware of the repercussions that came from rejecting men on dating apps, but also face-to-face as well. And will this be exacerbated in such contexts, or will women feel more pressure to break lockdown out of fear of things like this?
So Melissa, you need to wrap up, I think, very soon. So
okay.
1 minute, maybe 2.
Okay, so I also think it's important to think about maybe some of the positives. So earlier, a concern that women had about physical safety was, whether the people they were meeting were really who they said they were. And some of the women that I spoke to identified that video dating could be kind of a saving grace for this, that they could scope out their date beforehand without a risk to their physical safety. So it'll be interesting to see if features like this will stick around post-lockdown and when lockdown measures are starting to ease up. And also, there's also a lot of talk around the pandemic of people realizing that life's too short and things like that. And a lot of the women I spoke to said that They might be willing to take more risks once the pandemic's over, not around personal safety, but more around dating etiquette and waiting for the man to message first, or waiting for the guy to ask them on a date, and instead, you know, taking that risk and sending that first message and asking men on a date. So that's really interesting to think about as well. So yeah, these are just some of the issues that I've been exploring around gender and COVID-19. Again, really speculatory and exploratory, and in relation to my project specifically. This new data is suggesting that COVID-19 is adding new levels of required risk management from women over and above the already high rates of risk management needed to be performed when using dating apps. And going forward, this is something I'd like to explore further by speaking to more users, especially men as well, and especially as lockdown measures are easing up. So yeah, thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Melissa. That was really absolutely fascinating, really, really interesting. I've heard, you know, just from listening to people, some of that in terms of catching up with kind of what people are, you know, what practices are developing, what people are doing. But to have it all put together like that is just really, really interesting. So thank you so much. So we have time for a couple of questions, and there are a couple of questions here. And I'm just going to try and find the one that came up first. So Angelika Strohmeyer is asking, and this relates to something that was on your final slide. So, and I read it, and you know, you didn't have a lot of time to say it, so it'll give you that opportunity, which is about is there a move towards more sharing of intimate images and videos, and if so, are there policies of apps or mentions of security considerations in relating to image-based sexual abuse? And have you heard anything about safety in relation to these online situations, not just about their physical safety?
Yeah, so I mean, from what I've gathered, sending sex and nudes and also engaging in things like video chat and sex is on the rise, but this is obviously from dating app companies themselves that I'm getting this, not from participants. So I can say that much. And in terms of the emphasis on dating apps to make sure people are safe, women especially, a lot of companies now, even with the video chatting, are making it so that both sides have to say yes to doing it before they can join. So that's important, I think. It means that a man can't just randomly ring someone that they want to through the app. But I think some of the issues that were raised are really important. And I think there is actually petitions at the minute from people like Samantha Rothenberg for making dating apps more accountable for women's safety online. And that was just in relation to harassment, but I think also about women's safety online in terms of sexual imagery and sexual and abusing that as well is really important. I can't really say much more than that, but I think
that's fine. That's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, and we don't have a lot of time, so it's great. And another question here from Angela Plessis. And do you think the pandemic has resulted in the exclusion or greater inclusion of particular groups within the dating landscape? Does it say, for example, does the online Zoom date actually suit some groups better?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely could be the case. I mean, age is just one example, but people who are older are a little bit are told that they're more at risk from this pandemic and might feel that they have to stay in social isolation for a lot longer. So, you know, dates like these might be really, Zoom dates especially, might be really important for allowing people who are older to be included in dating, or even just, even if it's not, they're not doing it for dating, or friendship or companionship or all those other things that they might want to do. So I do think that it is potentially having that, and I think that is something that especially the role of the technology where that comes important. I think that's definitely something I want to explore more as well.
So thank you very much indeed. You'll be able to read in the chat. There are several other really interesting questions we can't go into, but I hope that will enrich your research, and maybe we get a chance to touch on them a bit later or in the chat rooms. But